Several important agreements were reached at last week's Hungarian-American summit meeting in Washington, of which the agreement on exemption from energy sanctions and the financial shield sparked the biggest debates at home. I'll ask Prime Minister Viktor Orbán about these as well. Good morning.
Good morning. There would be debates about these?
Well, certainly regarding the sanctions, at least let's get right to the heart of it. You said the other day that it's valid as long as you are Prime Minister and Trump is President. Yesterday, however, the American Foreign Minister said that this exemption is valid for 1 year. How do these two statements fit together? Or how can you resolve this?
The way it is in life. Whoever is on top, their word counts. The president is on top. This is valid as long as it is. We must reckon with the fact that as long as the President of the United States is called Donald Trump and there is a national government in Hungary, let's be modest, because ultimately it's not about me, but about what kind of government we have. Utility cost reduction will remain in effect. If either of these elements changes, there's a new situation, and then the utility cost reduction is gone. So this is a person-dependent agreement backed by the personal agreement of two leaders. The bureaucrats write down what they write down, but that has no significance.
So this means that now, as long as you are Prime Minister and Trump is President, energy and fuel prices will remain unchanged.
Look, if it weren't like this, if this weren't the deal or the hand dealt, then from the end of November, every Hungarian family would pay approximately triple utility bills. That's how it is. So there's no need to think about complicated diplomacy. Every Hungarian family would receive triple utility bills as a Christmas present, and gas would scratch or reach 1,000 forints per liter. That's the situation. We had to save Hungary from this, and we succeeded. I think there's no debate about this. It's good news. Good news for every Hungarian. Everyone has their governmental ars poetica. I try to phrase things in an understandable way, and I said in 2022 as well that those who don't vote for us will also do well with us. So it's not about Fidesz supporters paying low gas prices while leftists pay high gas prices. It applies to everyone. We achieved this for everyone. This is specifically such a topic where there's no place for any party political debate because every Hungarian benefits from it.
You said last time when we talked, and after the meeting as well, that you didn't give Trump anything in exchange for the exemption. However, critics of the agreement say that with defense industry, nuclear energy procurements, or LNG gas purchases, Hungary is paying the price for this exemption. Are these procurements because of this, or would they be needed anyway, and was this dictated by market logic?
We didn't pay a single filler for this exemption because the President of the United States loves Hungarians. Why is this so for him? Let the psychologists figure that out. What we're talking about is that the President, this is about a Christian person who is convinced that it's good if good things happen in the world. Life is easier, not bad things making it increasingly difficult. That's why he hates war. So it's not that he wanted to make peace, but we're talking about a person who sees war as senseless, hates it, and therefore feels it must be eliminated. 1. 2. If he can do good, he gladly does good. Now, since Hungarian energy imports from Russia, that is, Russia's total foreign sales of energy, Russian energy sales abroad, perhaps 0.2% of it. So, from the perspective of disciplining Russia, our purchases have no significance. Much larger volumes are represented by those energy items bought on the sly by Western European companies that loudly oppose Russia but deal in Russian oil and gas in their backyards. Ellis said this, by the way, I'm quoting him. So his wife is Slovenian, Central European. The American president has every reason when he looks at this Central European situation to want a fair, equitable solution or to squeeze the Russians, but he doesn't want to screw over those he likes. It's not more complicated than that. And he gave his word on this. We can trust in this. Q5.
Speaker 2. What is the significance of the other energy procurements, whether we look at nuclear or LNG gas, or the technological cooperation, of which we're also talking about several?
I tend to make agreements on behalf of the Hungarian economy that are good for the Hungarian economy not as a package, but separately, each one individually. That's the case here too. We established a 5-year liquefied gas purchase. Over 5 years, the Hungarian economy needs 45 billion cubic meters of natural gas per year, and we will buy 2 billion in liquefied form from the Americans over 5 years. So 45 relates to 2. But good, important, as they say, you need to diversify. The more places gas or oil comes from, the more security it gives Hungary. We don't usually talk about it, but the situation is that after 2010, we created many interconnections, pipeline interconnections. Nobody notices anymore, but opposition representatives tore the flesh off me or off my bones. When, for example, we built the Slovak-Hungarian interconnector, lots of smart experts, no need, will never pay off, and here, and here. Of course, when we look at whether it pays off, we have to see that it's not just about price, but also security. If there were no Slovak-Hungarian interconnector, we'd be in much bigger trouble. And we built the necessary pipelines in every direction, with smaller or larger capacities. So today, Hungary is a country that, although predominantly purchases gas from Russia under a long-term contract, and MOL also gets most of its oil from Russia, we have other secondary supplementary options that provide security. For now, we cannot replace the largest capacity pipes that are connected to Russia from elsewhere, but alongside them, we operate other connections as a supplement.
An agreement was reached on the financial shield. In an interview on Tuesday, you said about this that we can still draw it down in whatever form we want. The opposition accuses you of indebting the country with this, and that it's a giant loan. And they drew parallels with the 2008 IMF loan. First, does this parallel hold? And second, what specific situation could there be when such a shield would be useful?
It's not my job to think with the opposition's head, but I've never heard such nonsense in my life as I'm hearing about the American trip. How could a financial shield be bad for the country? The IMF loan that they took out, maybe that's what this is about. Old sins cast long shadows. And they're still explaining that's possible. The IMF loan means that you take out a loan, and in exchange, they expect all kinds of internal domestic economic measures. For example, take away the 13th month pension, or take away the 13th month salary. That's what they did. So it's true that the left-wing governments made agreements with the IMF that contained very severe measures for Hungarian people. That's why I sent the IMF home. We're a hospitable country, and the IMF can also have dinner with us. But it won't work if they create a financial situation that then forces our governments to harm Hungarian people. That's why I sent them home instead. This is an old story. That's why the IMF is a loan construction with domestic political and economic preconditions. This isn't what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is that in the international financial world, there are 4 or 5 tools with which countries in friendly relations with each other can help each other if one gets into trouble. I'm not saying that if the United States gets into trouble, we'll help them. But in principle, this is a mutual thing. It's more likely the reverse. The forint runs away. Some international speculative attack hits the Hungarian forint. We see this regularly. Then these tools exist operationally. There are 4 or 5 tools developed in international financial and economic practice, used partly by central banks, partly by governments. We're taking stock of these, we roughly describe their contours, and when we need one, we notify the Americans and draw them down.
Several international newspapers highlighted the ideological closeness between you, which is why the negotiations were or could be successful. How do you perceive how much this counted?
Well, that's the essence. Everything stands on this. So why does the United States consider Hungary a friendly country? And why did the previous American government, the left-wing American government, consider Hungary an enemy? We didn't find them, and we can't cause them such harm that they'd need to hate us or be in bad relations. Yet we had bad relations with the previous left-wing American government, and we have good relations with the current right-wing, let's say national government, or Christian, or conservative American government. And the reason for this
is that we see the world similarly. We identify our problems, everyone their own. We see that there are many similarities between them, and we learn from each other, or take from each other. We see how each solves them. Let's say one of the pillars of American politics today, perhaps the most important pillar, is that America must be protected from illegal migration. So the Hungarian government also stands on this basis. We say only those can come here and live with us whom we allow, not those whom Brussels sends here or forces on us. That's why the Brussels criticism from Washington and Budapest revolves on the same hinge, that an external power cannot force a migration policy on a country if it otherwise wants to reject migration. Or similarly, Christian values are so important to the American administration. They're in better shape in this regard perhaps than us. So the spiritual state of the United States can be said to be perhaps more massive than the Hungarian. This is, of course, hard to measure precisely, but one has this feeling. But we also implement modern Christian governance, or peace policy is like this too. The United States is convinced that what's good for America is if there's peace. Well, this is completely clear in the case of the Ukrainian-Russian war, translated to Hungary. For humanitarian and economic reasons too, we need peace in our neighborhood. And I could go on about what elements family support agrees on. Finally, there's a family-friendly government in America. Previously, there was LGBTQ, so this suspicious cohabitation, complicated, unnatural forms of cohabitation were specifically supported, financially supported by the American government. Or a policy that let LGBTQ activists into children's education over parents' heads. That's over. There's exactly the same family-friendly policy there as here. They protect the family, children, parents' rights, and so on. So this agreement provides the basis for economic cooperation.
You mentioned the war, and little has been said in the past week about what progress was made here, or what happened in the negotiations. You said the same thing, that you offered your own capabilities, that is, Hungary's capabilities, with which it can help Trump achieve peace. What are these capabilities? Was there any progress here at all?
I don't want to talk about specifics, because preparations for a big Budapest peace summit are underway. Hungary has value, a contribution to the peace cause. We're the only European country that has kept diplomatic channels open to the Russians continuously. We're the only country that is continuously in contact with them, negotiates with them, and I'm the only prime minister in all of Europe who can, when necessary, wants to from time to time, and can speak with the Russian president. This is a very important capability from the perspective of peace preparation, because if you're not on speaking terms with someone, how can there be peace? And today, only Hungary has this capability, but for various reasons. Perhaps it's not worth bringing up the reasons now because there's too much personal element in it. I've put 10 or more years of my life into ensuring that Russian-Hungarian relations, despite the bad historical background or backdrop, are reasonable, advantageous for both countries, especially for Hungarians. And now, in an unexpected situation, in an unexpected war situation, this energy invested over many decades is paying off. That's why we're in this position.
Since Europe has come up, Brussels almost immediately signaled after the exemption from sanctions that, from 2027, Russian oil cannot be imported into the European Union. What is the American exemption worth then, if we don't get the same from Brussels?
We had two battlefields so far. Regarding utility protection, one was the American left-wing government, the other is Brussels, which is even more leftist overall. So the world of Brussels bureaucrats. We consolidated the American front line, but the Brussels one is still open. We still have to fight for that. We still have to fight for it. This is an intellectually interesting debate too, although it goes to blood, which is perhaps more important than intellect, because the magnitude of utility bills belongs to the question of families' livelihoods, and it's a matter that cuts deep.
What the Brussels people came up with is that since I vetoed sanctions against Russia, against Russian energy every time, so when they wanted to introduce the type of sanction against Russian energy that would have been bad for Hungarian households, I always vetoed those, mostly alone. I played this 26 against 1 match several times. I lasted longer, and I would still veto. But what they're doing is that, from now on, this is not a sanction. So importing Russian energy into Europe is no longer a sanction, but a trade policy measure. And while sanctions require unanimity, a majority decision is sufficient for trade policy. That's the game they're playing. This is an open violation of European law, the rule of law, European cooperation, because it's a circumvention of everything on which European state cooperation is otherwise built. The worst thing Brussels does, they'll pay a very high price for this, because Hungary is a smaller country. But now everyone who lends their name to this will lose out later, because they too can be bypassed at any time with a solution contrary to European constitutionality, as this is. Of course we're suing. So if we don't give in, I'm fighting on the Brussels front line for Hungarian utilities with multiple types of tools. One is that we don't accept this obviously law-breaking and anti-European values solution that Brussels chose to shut out the national government that disagrees with it, Hungary, not as a method either, and here we turn to the European Court of Justice. Otherwise, I'm looking for other non-legal tools with which I can divert Brussels from this intention. There are such possibilities. If you'll allow, I won't reveal them now, after the battle.
The European Union views sanctions and the ban on importing Russian oil as one way of supporting Ukraine, but yesterday they actually transferred another nearly €6 billion support to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine is being shaken by a huge corruption scandal. What conclusion should or must Brussels draw from this, since it seems a lot of support is involved in this matter too?
There's the basic question, and there are the detailed questions. The basic question goes like this: what benefits Europe more, peace or war? My answer to this is that peace benefits Europe. Therefore, all efforts should be directed toward peace. Unfortunately, not everyone agrees with us Hungarians on this. There are numerous countries that identify their own interests, such that war is better for them than peace. And with this, they take enormous risks, step by step, pushing Europe inward into this war. They give weapons, they give money, they give technology, and it's on the agenda whether they'll give soldiers too. If yes, how? So the risk of the war's expansion is within daily proximity because of Western European state war leaders. Brussels plays a key role in this, by the way, in amplifying the war party. So that's the basic situation. Everything else is secondary. So if you've placed the pieces on the chessboard wrong, then it won't be a good game. You've ruined it. And now they're placed wrong on the chessboard. Europeans need to rearrange the chessboard. They need to turn around and move toward peace instead of war. Every single measure must be understood this way. Otherwise, they'll bring war into Europe, take out the money, and destroy the European economy. They've burned more than €185 billion, a terrible amount. If this had gone into the European economy wouldn't look like this. And they want to burn another 10 billion again and again, while we've long had no money. What are they doing? They want to take out loans. So they're even indebting all of Europe. Not only will the current standard of living suffer the consequences of bad policies, but our children and grandchildren will also suffer the consequences of this misguided bad war policy. That's why I fight so desperately, if I may put it this way, reasonably, kindly, but without giving up my position, to somehow bring down, not alone because that won't work, but to find allies to bring Europeans down from the war path.
Now, in such economic circumstances at home, they decided this week to pay the first part of the 14th month pension, and they're also transferring pension supplements this week. What considerations do you weigh in these decisions? Because many say it represents too great a budgetary risk, especially in such a situation as we're living now. Such generous support.
You can look at it this way. I don't want to say that there isn't something to consider in what the left-wing parties DK and TISA have to say. Because when you make such long-term measures, you give complete tax exemption to mothers, or make CSED and GYED tax exempt, or introduce a 14th month pension, then you take on long-term financial obligations. And to be able to do this, you must have some vision, cite, elegantly, a vision of the future, because maybe it fits this year, but what about next year and after? So this is an open-ended debate. Nobody here can say that only I or only you are right. The question is whether the considerations on which you make decisions are well-founded or not. And I claim that our decisions are well-founded. They have financial and economic basis. They're viable. We must do them despite the left's opposition. Yes, TISA and DK don't support the 14th month pension. That's true. They want to restructure the pension system. That's a bad idea. The 14th month is a good idea. They don't support that form of family support, giving tax exemption to mothers with at least 2 children. We think this fits. They don't. They don't support doubling the tax benefits for children, but we think it doesn't fit. We think it fits. And I could go on. Well, this is a real debate.
Yes, but the party, for example, the TISA party, officially says they don't talk about such things. It's the experts who talk about such things. But a political scientist said in recent days, addressing exactly these experts, that now is not the time to say who thinks what about the world. Now we should only focus on winning this election. So how can you have a real debate this way? How can the voters see clearly about who really thinks what?
That's why there's a national consultation. So that's why millions of Hungarian people received a questionnaire in recent times, and I asked them to read it, think about it, fill it out, and send it back, because this is the debate itself. Now, that there's cunning in politics, and a party seeking power with Brussels behind it doesn't want to reveal its intentions, this shouldn't cause intellectual difficulty. So TISA and the Pinks, these are left-wing parties. So they pursue left-wing economic policy. They support looser tax increases and dependence on Brussels. These are 2 very big mistakes. So these are left-wingers. So everyone can see through this. You don't need to be a nuclear scientist for this. The simplest Hungarian person also understands that this is what it's about. On the other side, there's a national government. That's how things stand. We used to say if something looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, then it's a duck. So the situation is that DK and TISA are left-wing parties wanting to implement exactly a left-wing economic policy with Brussels suspension. I think Hungarians understand this. We can conduct this debate even if DK and TISA want to hide their true intentions. They'll be exposed anyway. Man, there's an old saying that in a person's life the most harm is caused by the smallest body part. That's the tongue. So politics, where one must speak, sooner or later brings out its essence. See, they get exposed once every week, such that they defend what they think, they're cunning, they say it, and they don't. This doesn't work. People see through this. On the other hand, experts definitely can't be kept in check. So experts live from being experts. That is, they state their expertise, demonstrate it. I think it's clear as day. The national consultation brings all this to the surface too. And as we go before the election, it will become increasingly clear that there's left-wing economic policy, DK-TISA. There's national economic policy, Fidesz. There's national foreign policy based on sovereignty, Fidesz. And there's policy based on national subordination, subordination to Brussels, like DK and TISA. These all become clearer day by day. The campaign has exactly the meaning that these questions become clarified, and people can decide such that they really understand and see through the situation. The consultation helps.
Let's talk about one more topic, because they're doubling the basic fee for foster parents. How does this fit into the child protection measures of recent years? Because the opposition has perhaps attacked the government most fiercely in this area in recent months.
I can't say there isn't some truth in what they say either. We're talking about a very difficult area. We're talking about those children who don't have parents, for some reason. And they've left the blood-related family bond system. Because if someone loses their parents,
then an uncle, aunt, grandpa. So someone in the family, godfather, godmother is there to be able to help in such situations. But there are difficult situations when even this doesn't exist. This safety net doesn't exist. And the child leaves the blood-related family. And then the question is, what should happen? And in European culture, I think in the Hungarian person's heart too, in our instinct system too, children cannot be left alone. So we don't want to see street children. I could name countries where they don't care about these children, or the state doesn't consider it its task to take care of their upbringing, but we're still a decent Hungarian world. The child is the most important thing, every. Hungarian feels this way. If they see a child, they think of their own. And so obviously, if there's trouble, they want to help. That's how we are. And that's why the Hungarian decision is that in such cases, the state must step in. But these are very difficult fates. So it's very difficult for the state to function well, because the parents might still turn up. Raising children without parents is very difficult. Everyone who raises children knows this. Even your own is difficult, let alone without parents. These institutions are never in the center of politics. They often don't get the appreciation they deserve. Since many of these children with difficult fates become vagrants, these dark mafia-like figures appear there. So this is very difficult. But the state must not give up its mission, but must stand its ground even in such difficult circumstances. What is our answer? Our answer is that it's good if we find a family for as many children as possible. This is called the foster parent system. And although not in a blood-related family, they still grow up in a family, and we give these parents, foster parents, who do fantastic work, very difficult work, recognition. Partly in kind, this wasn't a problem either, and we give financial recognition too. Now we're also raising the amount that foster parents receive per child. We're doubling it. Even after this, however, children will remain for whom they don't sign up. There's no foster parent, although now we hope. We had all kinds of estimates made about this, that if we raise the state amount payable to foster parents to such a significant extent, then the number of foster parents will increase, and we'll be able to give even more children the chance to grow up in a family. But there will always be some children for whom they don't come. They must be raised in institutions. From here on, we can go in two directions. The first is that we trust the churches. I, for example, trust the churches, who have fantastic experience and moral commitment in this direction. So I'd be glad if as many children in institutions as possible were in church-maintained institutions. And many are. But even after this, children remain. And those must be cared for in state-maintained institutions. And there, we must make all kinds of rules to protect them, raise them well, raise them properly. Discipline is also part of this. Education is not just about loving the child, but loving the child well. And these decisions must be reviewed again and again from time to time, must be reinforced. And in recent weeks, politics has dealt with this a lot. The government has dealt with it a lot. We made decisions. These are excellent and good decisions. Good for the children and good for foster parents too.